Welcome, and today on the show we have Michael Badeski of INSEACT. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, thanks very much, Rafael. Glad to be on the show.
I'm excited to talk to you today because it's rarely the case that I talk to founders where I've already had a factory tour, I'm subject to privilege information in this case, but I would love to touch on it with our listeners because it's a visceral experience. So let's get straight into what INSEACT is, and there's obviously a clue in the name, right?
Sure. So INSEACT is an insect protein company, and we exist to sustainably bridge the protein population gap. And what we do is we grow insects, of course, and specifically the black soldier fly here in Singapore in our pilot facility, and we're expanding throughout Southeast Asia. And we generate protein, fertilizer, and oil, all of which is extremely sustainable and has a wide variety of uses in our food system.
Cool. So you used a term there, so I'm going to dig straight into it, actually. Protein population gap. What the hell is that?
So that is really the reason we got started. If we look at the major trends right now, we are seeing that, of course, the population is growing, and more people are eating protein and in larger quantities. So the trajectory we're on is needing 70% more protein by 2050. And the issue we have today in the food system is that pretty much all of the protein that you eat today is coming from one of two sources. It's coming from crops that we grow or wild fish that we catch. Everything else that we think of as protein, everything from plant-based meat to milk and eggs, it is all a derivative of these two because the animals that we eat need to be fed. Mm-hmm. And so the situation we have today is that almost all of the farmable land is already being used as farmland, which means that if we need more crops production or more land to graze our animals, we need to basically turn to deforestation. And actually 75% of global deforestation is driven by agriculture. And on the other hand, our fisheries are overcaught. We're pulling fish out of the ocean at 2.5 times the sustainable rate. So there's no more really way to increase that either. So we needed a new source of protein to keep up with the growing population. And that's where insects come in. This amazing thing called the black soldier fly we grow can eat waste. And in fact, in nature, that's its role. It eats decomposing waste, and it can turn it into healthy protein that can enter the human food chain at different stages, even if we're not eating it directly. It means that we've broken through this limitation of these two base sources that have reached their limits, and we have a whole new supply into the food chain.
Yeah, and I don't know many people that sort of hear the word insect and start kind of smacking their lips at the prospect of eating it. I mean, I have had exposure to some really innovative insect companies that are going that route, either through flowers and things to like create high protein bars. But there is a kind of, I guess, thing to overcome, certainly for Western cultured people around, like whether or not they want to eat insects. But you're not proposing that, right? You're not really your market isn't to replace Beyond Burgers or something with insect ones.
Yeah, that's correct. People are seeing sort of insects right now popping up on store shelves sort of as a novelty snack, but it's not really becoming popular yet. I think it will take time, and I think we'll get there. But at the moment, there are immediate applications. So we are using our insect protein as an ingredient for animal feed, and specifically we're targeting farmed fish and shrimp. Right now, the main protein ingredient in farmed fish and shrimp feed is actually wild-caught fish from the ocean that is ground up into a protein powder called fish meal and included in the feed. And so we think it's a little bit crazy to catch wild fish to feed them to our farmed fish. And so we've realized actually that insect protein is an incredible replacement for fish meal, works very well. And so this is our initial market, which is, still worth, even in Southeast Asia, specifically to certain species, we're talking more than $10 billion worth of feed every year.
Yeah, that blew my mind, actually, that I didn't realize. Obviously, people want to eat shrimp, prawns, nice protein sources, and you've got growing middle classes that are looking forward to eating tasty food. But I actually didn't appreciate. I had never really thought about, first of all, how those fish, those shrimp, etc. are fed. So when I started digging into it and understood that it takes around 2 kgs of wild caught fish to feed 1 kg or create 1 kg of seafood, it kind of suddenly makes you realize, hold on, that's not a good multiple when we've got severe challenges around biodiversity in the oceans, as I'm sure people have sort of seen with recent reports from WWF and others around biodiversity loss. So the prospect of insects in that food chain is kind of interesting, I guess, because it's certainly in theory, whether or not what you can in action, you're reducing the amount of fish needed just in the farming process, and that's kind of happening, I think, isn't it, in Europe with salmon and farms and things like that, which also have debatable levels of impact potentially. But what are you seeing here in Southeast Asia? Is it mostly fish meal that's fed to this $9 billion of revenue of fish farm input? Is that mostly wild caught fish?
Yes, it's made. Fish meal is made entirely from wild caught fish today, and it is the most essential and most expensive protein ingredient in the feed. And so this is driving feed prices in a lot of ways as well. And so if you are a farmer growing farmed fish or shrimp in this region, feed accounts for 60% of your operating costs. So their ability to make money is primarily driven by how much they have to spend on feed. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've realized is actually if we include the insect protein in the feed, the shrimp and the fish grow faster and they need less feed to grow to the same size. And so as you can imagine, for these shrimp farmers, fish farmers, this is a huge deal. And they are happy to find solutions that are performing better. Now, in addition to that, of course, it's much more sustainable, which is a win-win. We believe that the only way to scale up quite big and make change at a huge scale is to have an improvement that is economically viable. And so we're not relying on just the goodwill of the producers and our customers to buy it, but also because it's the best performing product out there.
And like specifically, you're using the black soldier fly. I think it's probably the rock star insect for the protein world, I guess, because there seems to be a lot of startups that are using that. So can you help us understand why the black soldier fly is such a brilliant species to partner with on this?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this black soldier fly, if it's the first time you're hearing about it, you'll be hearing about it a lot more going forward. It is, like you said, the rock star of the insect world. And they're amazing because, as I said, they're nature's recyclers. They will eat almost any organic matter, but also they're tropical. So you can find them all around the world near the equator. They like 27 to 33 degrees Celsius, and you can find them everywhere. So, for example, if you were to drop a piece of fruit on the ground or fell from a tree in the jungle, within a day or two, you'd find it crawling with black soldier fly larvae. But the other key thing with them is that they grow really quickly. They can grow over 1,000 times their body weight in about 10 days. And they are not a vector for disease. They don't bite, they don't sting, and they are actually incapable of carrying and transmitting diseases, which, of course, when you're growing and breeding many of them and having a growing industry, this is a key safety consideration to make sure it fits into the kind of public, into the public ecosystem without causing any issues.
When you say they don't bite, obviously, it's the insect when he becomes the fly. They start off as a larvae, or do you call it maggot, or is it just larvae?
Usually refer to it as larvae or BSFL, black soldier fly larvae.
Okay, but as soon as it becomes airborne, it then never needs to eat again, right?
That's right. And so that's actually the reason that the larvae grow so quickly is because as an adult fly, it cannot eat. Its mouth actually does not function. Mm-hmm. And so as a larvae, it needs to absorb all of the nutrients and energy for its entire life cycle in a short period of time, which is the reason the larvae grow so quickly. And that's actually what we are primarily producing and harvesting. And then a small percentage of the larvae become adult flies. And their really only function is to mate and lay eggs, at which time their life cycle is essentially over and it repeats.
And the point you made about the 1,000 times the body weight is, super amazing for these kind of applications, I guess, because no creature or thing really does it in that such speed. But can you just talk us through how this works then? Because it sounds, great. We're turning waste into protein, and protein is going into the fish. But how does it actually work? Like, what's the waste source, and like what are these outputs you mentioned, the oil and the fertilizer and stuff? Is it really that perfect in terms of the different outputs that come from this, and talk us through that process.
Yeah, so insect protein, and especially with black soldier flies, is a zero waste solution, and it really can close the loop in a circular economy and circular food and agriculture system. So these insects, they can eat waste, and they'll eat anything from agri-waste that's produced at industrial scales, from agricultural production, or food waste, fruit and vegetable waste, you name it. And you have to prepare a feedstock. So you prepare the feed for the insects using this waste. You need to make sure, of course, that it's balanced in terms of nutrition and things like this. And then as the insects eat it and grow, what happens is this waste is processed, and the output is protein, fertilizer, which is called frass, and oil. So you end up with a bunch of larvae that are living in their feed, which is actually how they grow in nature. And that's what we recreate in an industrial production system. And when you separate the larvae from the feed that they were in, the feed has essentially been converted into the insect's droppings, which is frass fertilizer. It's an organic fertilizer that can be used for a wide variety of agriculture applications. And then the larvae are processed into protein and oil. They have a high protein content and also an oil content. And these all have different applications. So the protein, we are using it for aquaculture, which is farmed fish and shrimp to replace that fish meal. And then the oil also serves well as an ingredient for animal feed, for example. And so the result is you have waste in, 3 sellable, valuable products out. You're eliminating the waste stream while plugging more usable products back into the food system.
You're not growing soy or something to feed an animal that could be feeding a human.
Yes, so that's right. You have to make certain considerations when choosing the feedstock for the insect. You need to make sure that it's going to be consistent throughout the year, so that like humans, you are what you eat. The insects as well. If we feed them inconsistent nutritional profiles, then the protein we produce will be inconsistent. So you want consistency, but you also want to think about scalability, what's available in large volumes. You want something that's concentrated, so it's easy to aggregate and not expensive. And so whatever you're using as a feed, that is a key decision there in really any insect company.
And you've chosen palm waste, correct?
That's right. So we took a global view of all the different waste streams that are available, looking at and screening them for volume, for what is the lowest value, what is literally going into landfill today, and what meets these other criteria in terms of scalability, easy to aggregate, concentrated. And we have figured out a way of using palm oil waste as the ingredient for the feed for these insects. And today, this palm oil waste can be found next to every palm oil mill. There are over 2,000 mills in the world, and more than 85% of them are in Malaysia and Indonesia. And the great thing about this is that it's highly scalable, but also this palm oil waste is causing a huge issue. It's going into landfill, and it's emitting methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas with a warming potential 25 times that of CO2. And we're realizing that if we can feed this to the insects, what they're doing is they're actually eliminating it before it has a chance to make these emissions. So in addition to the fact that insect production and insect protein is already a very low carbon footprint protein compared to the other sources we have today, this choice of feedstock we have at INSEACT is really, really reducing it even further.
If you take out the operations of the business, then is it like, because everybody's obsessed obviously with CO2 and methane these days, is it what you would call net zero?
We actually expect we are to be doing better than net zero. We are looking to have a negative carbon impact. We ran the math on the footprint from all of our other activities, all the energy we use in our processes, all the scope 2 emissions as well. So that's the transportation of our materials and all of these things. And when we net that all out with the carbon impact of using this palm oil waste as a feed, we are actually coming out as net negative, which makes us one of the first carbon negative proteins that you can buy. And we're really excited about this. This means that for every kilogram of this protein we're producing, we're actually eliminating CO2 rather than producing it.
And do you think it will have an impact on fishing? I assume the stuff that turns into fish meal is not being sold for obviously human consumption and maybe, I don't know, lesser grade or maybe dubious species. I don't know. But do you think that the insect aquaculture increase will change the amount of fishing being done for simply for farmed processes?
Yes, and that's absolutely one of our goals. In fact, that's closely related to how we got started with this. So my co-founder, Tim, him and I were classmates at INSEAD MBA program. And he actually showed up to the MBA already with the idea of building this. And it came from a very kind of intense personal experience he had. So he is half Dutch and half Samoan. So he was, his father's from the little Pacific island of Samoa, and he was there visiting his family in 2017. And it's a fishing-based economy. That's, when you're a small island in the Pacific, you have this incredible resource all around you. And they've been getting really hit with lower catch and lower yield lately. And the reason his cousin there was explaining to him is because just off the coast, there are these industrial trawlers that are scooping up fish, and they were telling him this fish is not even for humans to eat. It's just being ground up into animal feed. And that was sort of the moment of realization, hey, this needs to be solved. This doesn't make any sense. And so that was what set out the quest for, hey, how do we replace this stuff? And what led us ultimately to insect protein as a scalable solution. And so what we hope to achieve with this is to eventually replace all the fish meal in the feed for aquaculture and eliminate the practice of catching a fish for fish meal, massively reducing wild catch and allowing our fisheries to recover a little bit.
Amazing. And for your, I think it'd be good if you kind of went into a bit about your background and why Tim and you hit it off, because you have quite complementary skills.
Yes. So first of all, I feel very lucky to be working with Tim. We are a great team. And like you mentioned, we have different backgrounds and complementary skills with a very shared understanding of what we're looking to achieve with this. And so it's really the ideal fit. So personally, my background, I'm Canadian and American, and I'm an industrial engineer. And so when I was working in Canada and the US, my projects were on things like designing the processes and also the buildings to house the processes for industrial production, on everything from algae production to vehicle manufacturing. And so my clients would hire me to help work to design essentially their new production. And while there was something really satisfying about making everything more efficient, because that was really fundamentally the goal of what I was working on, and it was really fascinating to work across many industries, really my personal goal and what I want to do with my career is have the biggest environmental impact I can. I really believe that, kind of all capital is impact capital. The work you do and is for your career, so you spend most of your time doing it, right? That's really what you leave behind in your legacy. And I wanted to be building something highly impactful. And so even though I was making things more efficient, it wasn't really, I thought, the highest leverage use of my career. And I was thinking, if I'm building a company that is sustainability focused and also economically viable and scalable, that's probably the most impactful thing I can do. And that's what led me to the INSEAD MBA in the first place. INSEAD really focuses on this concept of business as a force for good and is also very startup focused. In fact, the first ever venture capitalist, George Dorio, was the founder of INSEAD. And so that brought me to the program, and that's where I met Tim. And Tim is an entrepreneur by background. He started his first e-commerce business as a late teenager, and later moved from the Netherlands to China, and he was living in Beijing, where he had an infant nutrition business that he set up and operated and grew over the course of 7 years, and then exited before coming into INSEAD. And so he had the kind of 0 to 1 background. He'd done it several times. He had the nutrition perspective as well. I had the engineering background on how do we actually execute on a project like this, and also the sustainability focus, which he has as well. So INSEACT actually started as a student project as part of the venture competition, which it entered and actually won in the end, which gave some, more confidence. Hey, we have a little bit of traction here. Maybe we should keep going with this. So after the school program, Tim went to join InnovaFeed, which is the largest and best funded insect company in the world, based in France. And I was cutting my teeth in the startup world at a fast scaling Series A startup in London. And so we're doing that for about a year, at which point we realized, okay, for example, at InnovaFeed, they're doing some things really well, but there's a whole opportunity in Southeast Asia that was untapped. And that's when Tim and I were catching up and saying, okay, we should really raise around and go build this thing. So that's how we got started. And that was at the beginning of 2021, beginning of last year.
And like, why Singapore? Why Asia? I mean, Singapore's your headquarters, but obviously not where your raw ingredients and probably not where you'll end up housing all these black soldier flies. Why here? There's a ton of money in Europe. I think there's a couple, if not more, unicorns that have raised. We're talking billion-dollar valuation already. Startups who are in the black soldier fly or mealworm or whatever insect-based aquaculture and feed area. Why is here so attractive to you guys?
Yeah, so we saw what was happening in Europe, and the whole industry really had its genesis there. There was a lot of early grants that were going in, even while the really fundamentals of how do you mass produce this insect protein was getting started. Although looking at where the future is in the industry, if we look at these insects, the key questions for us are: what is the market that we're going to sell into, and what is the feedstock, and what do the insects need to grow well? And so our market is here. I mean, as I mentioned, we're selling into the aquaculture industry. 90% of global aquaculture is in Asia, and so this is really where the activity is and where our customers are. If we take our initial niche, for example, in shrimp farming, there's huge shrimp farms in Indonesia and Vietnam and Thailand and all around here. And then also from a production side, as I mentioned, we figured out how to use palm oil waste as a feed. And there's a high concentration of this waste that's available in Malaysia and Indonesia. And then, of course, this insect, which I mentioned is a tropical insect, likes warm weather. I mean, this is where it's from. And so it means that we don't need to spend a lot of money on heating and cooling. We don't need to burn a lot of energy to do that. We just use fresh air. And if you're building a facility for these insects in Europe or North America, where you have cold winters, for example, you end up, I mean, to me, heating a huge production facility to the temperature of a sauna doesn't really make too much sense. And it seems quite energy inefficient, right? So,
yeah, just a bit.
Just a little bit, and they also like 80% humidity. I mean, they really like, these conditions that we have in Singapore and Indonesia and Malaysia all year round.
Yeah.
And so we picked Singapore as getting the place to get started and as our headquarters, because here we can attract top global talent, we can attract plenty of venture funding, and we are operating out of the whole region, and Singapore has such convenient access across these borders. It's really the logical place to be building in Malaysia, to be building in Indonesia, and to be selling into the whole region, actually.
Yeah, imagine actually breeding or growing an animal in the environment that it naturally exists. I mean, that's a radical idea for humans. We like to just pick stuff up one place, drop it somewhere else, and run with it, right? So yeah, it doesn't make any sense, does it? I think this is why heating facilities, particularly when we're looking at energy usage so critically now, it doesn't make much sense why all these data centers are moving to Norway and other places that are naturally cold, because the cost of air conditioning and the energy requirements for them are so big. So it kind of named itself, I guess, INSEACT, because you're both at INSEAD anyway, and talking about insects. It wasn't one of those situations where you deliberated for many days over the name, I guess.
No, we maybe had too much fun playing with this name. So yeah. It is, if the INSEADers will see it as a nod to where we got started, but also insect and impact, which is really what we're going for. But also we're dealing with issues of seafood and solving problems in the ocean as well. So we are in the sea, in sea, and also we're working and acting in Southeast Asia as well. So there's a few different layers here, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a hard one naming a company, but what's making you different then? Because, apart from your location, is there anything that you guys are doing secret sauce-wise that you're prepared to share?
There is quite a lot we're doing secret sauce-wise, although there's not too much of it I can share with all of your listeners, Rafael, unfortunately. But we have taken, let's just say, a really rigorous industrial engineering approach, which has fundamentally changed the way we are planning on scaling up. And also, our feedstock is a breakthrough. We are the only ones that are able to produce this stuff, or to use it in a way that the insects can eat it.
And I will share that your initial facility is super interesting. I think it's kind of I guess the breeding room is probably a bush tucker trial nightmare for someone who's not so keen on flying things, but it's all extremely controlled. You've got the adults love making in a nice blue light, which does it for them, and they're actually very docile. They're not scary, are they? But I guess the scary bit is there's so many of them. You must have some interesting stories or anecdotes around when it's first of all, it's a very controlled environment. I was super impressed by the way you can literally smell the palm waste. It's quite pungent, let's put it that way, and then seeing the different growth stages of the larvae and actually what comes out the other. These guys like absolutely chomp through this stuff, and they turn, and the smell completely changes. It loses its sort of vinegary or sort of acidicness, and it becomes a bit more like a sort of hayy kind of sweety scent, a bit like I don't know. Is it fair to say like horse manure or something like that? Has elements of it, and it's unbelievable the amount of waste that they can convert in such a short space of time. That's what kind of blew my mind.
Yes, they really are an amazing insect, and research started back in the 90s and 2000s across like thousands of insect species, which ones might be the most applicable to industrial scale, and it sort of got narrowed down to just a few. And so the big three right now are black soldier flies that we grow, also mealworm, and also crickets. But the black soldier fly eat and grow the fastest. They can be harvested the quickest, which means that you can produce the most for a certain amount of equipment and for a certain footprint of land, which is what we are very excited about. Now, in our facility...
Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, has it gone wrong? Like, because you have very different rooms to describe it. You've got kind of a breeding room where the adults are, and they're kind of laying their eggs. Are they eggs initially, I guess?
Yeah.
Which hatch into these almost, I mean, you can barely see them initially. The larvae are tiny. It's not like a maggot you'd find in a bin, right? It's kind of like almost like a dust-like seed that if you really zoom in on, you can kind of see wiggling. Like it's a tiny maggot. And they obviously go into the feedstock, etc., into a nice kind of, imagine a worm farm or an ant farm, right? But you've got a lot of moving pieces here. Like there must have been, setting up the facility, there must have been occasions where things haven't always gone right. So what's it been like on the journey for you guys? I mean, I don't know if you're prepared to share anything, but
yeah, of course. It was actually quite an adventure setting up this facility. So we're talking about INSEACT's pilot facility, which is here in Singapore, and really it was built as a proof of concept so that we could validate our engineering and our biology. And what I mean by that is we want to make sure that the design of our equipment and all the settings and the temperatures and the airflows and all that are working, but also on the biology side, knowing what are the yields we get, how many eggs are produced per fly, for example, or how efficiently do the larvae convert the waste into body mass. And so we set up this facility at the end of 2021 in just a few short months, and we pushed ourselves to a very aggressive timeline. When we moved into this site, it was an empty concrete box, 4 walls, ceiling and floor. It had no lights, no ventilation, no electricity, no water, no walls, nothing. And while the construction was ongoing, and we designed this whole thing ourselves in-house, by the way, and procured the equipment ourselves. And while we were setting it up, we had the equipment arriving before the renovation construction was even finished, and we're trying to do everything at once. It was really an intense and somewhat chaotic scenario. And these pieces of equipment we're trying to bring in, and some of them are quite large, and even trying to squeeze them into the freight elevator was sometimes literally like a 10-person job of like heaving against the side of this thing. It was really quite a comical sight. But we did get it up and running with a few hiccups at the beginning, of course. So I remember, you're talking about this fly colony where we have all these adult flies, and we're talking hundreds of thousands in this big walk-in space, and I'm in there tending to them, and they're landing all over you, but they don't bite and they don't sting, and you get pretty used to it. And they're doing their thing, they're mating, they're laying eggs, and all is well. And we had a power cut at that time, and so suddenly, like, the ventilation and the background noise disappears, the lights go completely black, and all of a sudden you can't see a thing. All you can hear is just like the buzzing all around you and feel them landing. And I'm normally very comfortable with these insects, but in this was just in the first weeks of setting up the facility, and I can tell you that was I guess the true test of my comfort with with these black soldier flies.
Yeah, because the room is actually, it has no windows, it has absolutely zero natural light. It's this there's a lot of nets obviously that inside where the flies are, to kind of, so you can walk into the room without them all kind of flying out the door. So you must have been feeling your way to try and to work out even like where the door would be.
Yeah.
or there should be some exit lights, I guess.
Yes,
did that kick in?
We had one of the corner kicking in, but it was not sufficient, I would say, for the situation. It's quite comical. We had all kinds of other things at the beginning. One interesting feature of the way these insects grow is they produce heat while they are eating and growing, and so you can imagine them living and eating in their feed, and the feed gets warm. And actually, if you don't control the environment and the airflow and to make sure they stay at a comfortable temperature, the feed can heat up to 60 degrees Celsius or even warmer, and they'll actually eventually cook themselves in it. So one of the key things you have to understand when you're setting up the facility is how to manage their environmental controls. But what they will do is they basically, before that happens, they will do what's called a crawl out, and the insect would literally try and crawl out of the container. And there is, on our first batch, before we had kind of figured out our airflow situation, we had what we call an MCO, which is a mass crawl out, where we were running around with brooms and dustpans trying to, sweep up the larvae that are all making a break for it across the floor at the same time. It was really quite a situation, but again, learning experiences, and we'd rather figure it out at the small scale in the early days, so that when we build this next facility next year, that's all figured out.
And that's the plan. Yeah, next year you're hoping to go full scale production, and where do you think I assume outside of Singapore for that, somewhere near your waste feeds?
That's right. So we don't want to spend a lot of money on diesel fuel, burning it just to truck this waste around. So we're going to go to the source of the waste. So we'll be building a facility next year that will be in Malaysia, and it will be our first commercial scale facility. So, we expect actually to be building even bigger ones in the future, but this one is already taking us out of concept phase and into a fully fledged operation phase. That's
super cool. And I know you've got already some very well-known and reputable investors that are on the journey with you. So I really hope that that you guys can start to scale it up in the region, because whatever we see in terms of reduction of, well, first of all, I love more circular approaches. I'm really, think that we've got to stop fishing in the way we are. Otherwise, it's not good for everyone. And so the small part you play with aquaculture currently, which could easily expand, I think will be a critical part for people sort of starting to understand that there's better ways of doing things, and we can produce more protein, which is a valuable thing that we're going to have to do as populations increase, without using more land mass, and that's a critical area, I think. So I do hope that the investors are as excited about that as I am.
They are. We've been very lucky to be supported by great investors such as Asian Development Bank Ventures, for example, who have been a tremendous backer for us along this journey. Yeah, I think in addition to replacing the wild-caught fish, which is sort of our initial goal, coming back to the bigger picture of kind of this sustainably bridging the protein population gap, the future markets of insect protein are also really interesting. So there are market reports done by research firms, not us, but outside opinions that are sharing that they expect the insect protein market to be about $10 billion by 2030, which is about 7 years from now. And that's going from not just replacing fish meal for farmed fish and shrimp, but then also this insect protein and the insects themselves are suitable as ingredients in other animal feed, for example, for chickens and for pigs. But also it can be used as pet food, and there are now on a lot of store shelves pet food that's available that's replacing the animal protein like the chicken and things like this with much more sustainable insect protein. And of course, there is the human food and direct human consumption thing as well, which I think we're going to get to. I think of when kind of eating raw fish and sushi arrived in North America a couple generations ago, and people were a little bit unsure and hesitant and a bit weirded out. And then, a decade later, 2 decades later, you can find a sushi restaurant anywhere, basically anywhere in North America, and that's usually the one people will pay the biggest premium for. And I think that tastes and thinking will come around on insects as well, but it will take some time. And right now we have customers that want it. We have a way of getting it into the food system. I see the insect protein as becoming almost like a standard protein in the human food chain, and it can enter at different stages. And I don't think we need to eat it ourselves or even know that it's in the food system ourselves for it to be making the whole food system more sustainable. Because we found that most of the time, people don't ask what their dinner had for dinner. If you were eating shrimp, like when's the last time you're ordering a shrimp, and you're not asking like, okay, what did this shrimp eat? And it's important, and people should ask, but they don't. And so if we can replace, ingredients in their feed with something more sustainable, healthier, then people will be eating, and their footprint and contribution to environmental damage from their meals will be lowered without them even realizing it. And that's what we want to get to.
When you get really into the detail around how much food is being moved such vast distances to feed chickens, feed cows, how much food is being produced to create those protein sources, not just food, water, and all the resources that we're doing. And then, of course, that you've got the whole issue with food waste itself, where we're kind of a third of it is just ending up rotting or being disposed of. We've just got to get a lot more efficient in how we do things. And the great thing is that companies are starting to make more commitments about science-based targets, net zero, etc. And the only way they're going to do that is by adopting new techniques and approaches and innovations. So I think you've got a very bright future here, Michael, and Tim as well, and the whole INSEACT team. And I'm really grateful for you coming on, explaining this whole world of black soldier flies, because as you say, everybody's going to be hearing more and more about them. And I'm really, hoping I get to come, and what we should do is when we move into video casts, we should just do one in the breeding room.
That's a great idea.
Because we wouldn't get bitten. Although I think your kind of blackout experience means you're probably extremely casual with it. But I'm not sure I would be quite so calm if I was in there with a million black soldier flies wanting to mate on me.
It is. It's definitely a unique experience, but I've yet to see somebody come out of there with kind of an invigorated smile. It's definitely
traumatizing.
It's definitely fun.
But this is the wonder of nature, to be honest. Like the fact that stuff hits the floor in the jungle and can be, turned into nutrients, and that is the circle of life. And tuning into this kind of more regenerative and bio engineered understanding, the complexity of nature is also the guiding light towards solutions where we actually leverage that. And that's kind of what I love about what you guys are doing, because it's easy to say gross insects and we should just all eat vegetables, but the reality is people want to eat meat, and we've got more and more people, and as you say, protein is an essential part of life and our food chain. So I do hope that the whole industry, I hope you get many competitors. I hope you guys do fantastically well also, and that we can start to innovate around some of the biggest challenges, because as we know, the food agriculture world is like a massive part of our decarbonisation journey, and it's just fantastic that you guys are leading the way here in Southeast Asia, along with some other notable names. And I really look forward to tracking it and sharing more on this journey. Perhaps we'll get Tim on sometime to talk about his Dutch Samoan experience and a little bit more one day in the future. But thank you, Michael, for joining and explaining everything.
Rafael, thanks so much for hosting me and INSEACT today.